Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the woods. The year is somewhere around 1273, and you're already regretting your career choices. You're a medieval hunter, though not a very good one, and the forest around you is both your workplace and, quite possibly, your grave. The trees are still dripping from last night's rain. Everything smells like old leaves, wet fur, and something that might be mold or might be the inside of your boots. You haven't eaten anything substantial in 2 days, and the sun's barely up. Birds are chirping like they've got a concert to headline, and somewhere in the distance, a fox is laughing at your life choices. This isn't some glorious night's adventure. There's no silver-haired ranger guiding you, no magical bow that auto-aims. It's just you, a sagging leather quiver, and a slightly splintery longbow that creaks when you breathe near it. You've missed 3 rabbits already this morning. You're beginning to suspect they know. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this in some far-off place, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when folks are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, damp cloak slapping against your legs. The underbrush snaps underfoot, so much for stealth. Medieval hunting isn't just hard, it's an ongoing embarrassment. You don't have the scent masking technology or fancy camouflage. No trail cameras or lightweight thermal gear. All you've got is instinct, a bad map drawn on sheep hide, and the growing suspicion that the deer are holding a meeting to mock you. By the way, historians still argue whether medieval hunters in your social class even had access to decent training or just learned by, well, starving less than the guy next to them. Your boots are stiff with dried mud, but the left one squelches just a little too often, an ominous sign. You pass an old tree marked with a crude X in charcoal. It's your own mark. You've walked this loop at least twice this morning. Still, there's always hope in the next clearing. You pause at the edge of a thicket, scanning for movement. Nothing, unless you count that squirrel blinking at you with mild disdain. You raise your bow. Draw. Release. The arrow flies. It sticks into a tree with the same enthusiasm as a tired spoon into cold porridge. The squirrel is gone. So is your will to live. You sigh, and your breath fogs the air. You're not entirely sure if it's despair or just the weather. Either way, breakfast is once again not happening. The truth is, medieval hunting is less about the kill and more about waiting around, listening to your stomach complain like an angry bard. You reach into your satchel and find 2 withered apples and a lump of hard cheese that's begun to fossilize. You gnaw at it anyway. It's better than the time you tried foraging and spent 6 hours hallucinating because you misidentified a mushroom. You're still not sure if that tree really did recite poetry, or if you just really needed sleep. Movement. Your heart jumps. Something rustles through the brush. You freeze, barely breathing. This is it. A rabbit bursts out, darts left, and vanishes. You reach for another arrow, too late. It's gone. Fin. You lower your bow and mutter something unrepeatable in polite company. Even the trees seem to sigh with you. You weren't always this bad. Okay, yes you were, but at least back then you had optimism. Now you just have calluses and a growing suspicion that nature itself is out to embarrass you. Which frankly checks out. Your ears prick at the sound of distant church bells from the village. Faint but familiar. It's terse, Mid-morning. You've wasted 3 hours and caught nothing. At this rate, your reputation will drop below the village pig herder's nephew who once caught a fish using a shoe. A gust of wind pushes through the forest, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp moss and distant hearth fires. You're suddenly deeply aware of how cold your fingers are. You forgot your gloves? Again. You shove your hands into your armpits, trying to warm them, all while pretending this is exactly what skilled hunters do. According to a 13th century manual, one only nobles were supposed to read, "You should be silent, still, and blend into the landscape." You, on the other hand, are currently wheezing from that last hill and humming out of boredom. Birds scatter when you step too loudly. You don't blend so much as barge through. But this is your life now. Hunting isn't a sport for you. It's not even entirely legal, since you're not nobility. But you're not poaching exactly. Just aggressively gathering opportunity with a strong bow and weak aim. You crouch in some tall grass, determined to wait this one out. Maybe if you sit still long enough, an animal will trip and fall into your lap. Stranger things have happened, like that time a hedgehog stole your bread and waddled off without remorse. The minutes stretch. Your breathing slows. The forest hums around you. Despite the hunger, the cold, and the overwhelming odds of failure, there's something peaceful here. Something ancient. You can almost imagine a time when people didn't need permissions, permits, or pointed questions from grumpy monks about stolen venison. But that illusion fades as your stomach growls, loud enough to startle a nearby bird. You sigh again, shoulders slumping. Maybe you'll get lucky tomorrow, or maybe you'll eat moss. You stand, knees cracking like old kindling, and set off again, determined to keep missing with slightly more dignity. You wake up the next morning feeling like someone stuffed hay into your joints overnight. Your back is stiff, your feet are numb, and there's something poking your ribs. It's either a pine cone or last night's shame. You groan, sit up, and remember, you're still in the woods, still hungry, and still the kind of hunter whose arrows mostly hit logs, moss, and, once, a tree stump that suspiciously resembled a deer until you got closer. Your bough lies beside you, already damp with morning dew. It creaks when you pick it up. That's not a good sign. You run your fingers along the grain. It's not made from the best yew, more like the kind of scrap wood a carpenter throws out on a Tuesday. It's warped from rain, from time, from your consistently bad luck. One of the knocks is chipped, the bowstring frays at the edges, and you're not even sure you strung it right this time. You take a test pull and the whole thing groans like it's contemplating retirement. This is the unfortunate reality of medieval hunting gear. It's only as good as your social status and connections. If you were a noble, you'd have a sleek longbow made by someone who knew what they were doing, not traded from a brewer's cousin who once saw someone shoot an arrow once. You try to patch the knock with a bit of waxed thread. It doesn't help much. You squint at your arrows. 3 remain, all slightly crooked. One's missing a fletching. One is bent from your last heroic shot into a rock. And the third, well, it's more symbolic at this point. You keep it in case you ever need to write a dramatic song about hopelessness and splinters. Historians still argue whether commoners like you had access to consistently functional weapons or if most just made do with whatever they could carve out of regret and oak. You trudge through the underbrush again, trying not to think about how many nobles get their meat delivered directly to their halls, already spiced, probably by someone whose job title is venison arranger. Meanwhile, you're debating whether eating tree bark will ruin your teeth permanently. Russell. You freeze. It's something big this time. Heavy-footed. Maybe a deer? You crouch and knock an arrow. The string whines under pressure. You peer through the thicket. Your heart thumps like a drum solo. And then out steps a wild pig. It's not majestic. It's not graceful. It's a lump of bristly, mud-coated muscle with tusks like daggers and an expression that says, "Try me." You swallow hard. You draw the bow. Carefully. Steadily. The pig snorts and looks directly at you. You let the arrow fly. It arcs. Beautifully. Lands 10 feet to the left of the pig, squarely in a puddle. The pig doesn't even flinch. It just trots away with the world-weary air of someone who's seen this all before. You lower the bow slowly, mentally composing the letter you would write to your ancestors if they hadn't all died of shame already. You're down another arrow and up nothing except disappointment. You keep walking, brushing past branches that whip you in the face. The forest has no sympathy for failed archers. The path narrows, winding past tangled roots and damp hollows. You reach a small rise and look out over the clearing below, deer territory, according to that hunter you met once in the tavern, who was either brilliant or drunk. You settle in beneath a tree, trying again to make your bow feel like an extension of your arm and not something you found leaning against a latrine. The problem, of course, is craftsmanship. Medieval bows were deceptively simple but finicky to make. The best ones took months to shape, cure, and string properly. Yours took an afternoon, a strong ale, and several bad decisions. And let's not forget arrows. Arrows back then weren't mass-produced. You had to make your own or trade for them. Feather fletchings had to be bound just right, the shaft straightened over heat, the tip hammered to shape. Your last attempt at making one resulted in a sad, spiral-flighted disaster that flew like a drunk bee. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. Nothing but birds. No hoofbeats. No rustle of prey. Just the sigh of wind in the trees and your own stomach's angry protest. A squirrel chirps mockingly from above. You look up. It throws something. Possibly an acorn. Possibly shade. You mutter, grab your gear, and keep walking. You pass a fallen log and remember a tale you heard once. An old hunter claimed rubbing a bough with garlic made it luckier. You tried it. It made you smell like garlic and failed even faster. You stop again to inspect your string. It's loose. Always loose. The constant damp makes it sag, and you forgot to wax it again. Rookie mistake. Not that you're new. You're just consistently bad. You tighten it anyway, humming softly to yourself. Something tuneless but calming. Something to remind you you're still here. Still trying. Somewhere deep inside, you suspect the animals know. That they've passed word of your incompetence from burrow to treetop. That the hedgehogs laugh when you're not looking. You find a small clearing, soft with moss, and sit down. You unroll your spare cord, hoping to restring the bow. Your fingers are clumsy. You fumble, drop the string, pick it up, and try again. This time it catches. Halts. You test the pull. Still creaky, but maybe slightly less awful. You take a breath. Slow. The kind monks take before chanting. The kind bards take before singing about someone else's courage. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow you'll hit something. Today, you just don't want to break your last arrow. You wake up to the smell of smoke, which, for once, is actually from your own campfire and not another sign of your slow descent into madness. You've managed to coax a small, sad flame from a pile of damp sticks and a piece of linen soaked in tallow, courtesy of a failed candle-making attempt that left you smelling like rancid sheep for 2 days. The fire crackles weakly, barely hot enough to warm your hands, but enough to give you hope. You stare into it, chewing thoughtfully on a strip of leather that might have once been jerky. Hard to say now. It tastes mostly like regret and salt. Today, you decide things will be different. You will shoot something. You will bring it back. You will march into town and be celebrated not as that guy who once chased a rabbit into a ditch, but as a real hunter. You sling your bow across your back, adjust your belt, still missing the 4th hole since it shrank from being soaked last week, and start toward a different part of the forest. New day, new path, right? You pass beneath drooping branches that seem to judge you. Everything's damp, the leaves heavy with dew. Your boots are beginning to split at the seams, and you've patched them so many times they now resemble medieval sock puppets. But they still hold, barely. As you reach the edge of a narrow glade, you spot it. A deer. Not just a blur or a rumor or a hoof print you stared at for an hour wondering if it was actually a rock. A real, live deer, grazing at the far edge. It's back to you. A perfect target. You drop low, heart thudding. You reach for your arrow. The one with all its fletchings, straight enough to at least pretend it's aerodynamic. You nock it. Your fingers tremble slightly, not from nerves, but from cold and hunger. You draw. Breathe. Release. The arrow flies. And misses. It lands with a dull wunk into the moss, so close it actually startles the deer, which bolts into the trees with a sound like thunder through leaves. You collapse back into the grass, staring at the sky. A leaf lands on your face. You leave it there. What's the point? This, of course, is where the real kicker lies. The lack of precision tools. Medieval hunters had no proper sights, no consistent arrow weights. Even the fletchings could be lopsided depending on the quality of goose you got them from. You, naturally, had to use seagull feathers once. Never again. Historians still argue whether medieval hunting was truly about skill or more about luck, persistence, and knowing which bribes to pay the local gamekeeper to look the other way. You roll over, brush off the leaf, and stare into the woods. Then, faintly you hear it. A sound. Hoofbeats? You sit up slowly. No, not hoofbeats, drums. You inch toward the sound, weaving through brush until you reach a path. There, you spot a hunting party in the distance. 5 men on horseback, dressed in bright, embroidered tunics, their bows gleaming, their dogs prancing ahead like they've been told they're royalty. Which they basically are. Nobles. Great. You duck behind a tree, peeking through the bark like a very cold, very bitter squirrel. They pass without noticing you, laughing at something, probably how they caught a boar with a net while drunk last weekend. You sigh and retreat deeper into the woods. It's illegal, after all, for commoners to hunt noble game without permission. That deer you just missed could have earned you a hefty fine, or worse, some time in the local stocks. You've already spent 1 night there for unauthorized squirrel trade. Not your best moment. Still, you keep walking. You reach a spot where the underbrush thins and the trees form a kind of natural corridor. This, you've read, on a torn page from someone else's book, is the kind of place deer like to travel. You wait. Quiet. Motionless. A trickle of sap lands on your head. Of course it does. As you clean it off, you spot something in the grass. A feather. Long, curved, and sturdy. Probably from a goose. Possibly dropped by a better hunter. You pocket it. Maybe your arrows will fly straighter now. Or maybe the forest just pities you. Still, you sit and begin reshaping one of your damaged arrows, using your small knife to smooth the shaft, rewrap the fletching with twine, and murmur encouragements to the wood like it's your last ally. It's here, in the middle of nowhere, that you feel the strange rhythm of medieval life settle in. Time is slow. Hunger is fast. The days are ruled by sunlight and sound. Birds, bells, your stomach, distant dogs, the creak of your bowstring. It's monotonous, exhausting, and just weirdly real. You test the arrow. Not bad. Could be worse. You don't see anything else to shoot at, so you just fire it at a tree to test the balance. It hits. Dead center. Naturally. You laugh softly. Bitterly. The tree wins again. You wake up the next morning to a suspicious dampness in your boot. You wiggle your toes and realize, with a deep sense of dread, that a slug has taken up residence sometime during the night. You tip the boot upside down and shake it. Out plops your new roommate, slimy and disgruntled. You nod at it respectfully. It's probably caught more food than you have lately. You pull your boot back on with a sigh, trying to ignore the squish. The ground is wet again. Everything is wet. The medieval forest doesn't believe in drying out. Your clothes smell like smoke and mildew, your hands are raw from bowstring friction, and your stomach is now a percussion instrument playing the drum solo of despair. Today, you decide to switch tactics. Still, hunting isn't working. So you try something more sophisticated, trapping. Now, in theory, setting snares is simple. You take a bit of twine or wire, loop it, and prop it in place where small animals pass through. Rabbits, ideally. Maybe even a pheasant if you're wildly lucky. You've heard stories of trappers living off the land this way, catching enough food to feed a family. You, however, can barely tie a shoelace without it looking like a failed marriage proposal. Still, you give it a go. You carve a few pegs, shape a loop from some old string, and set the snare at a likely-looking trail marked with tiny hoofprints. You're feeling quite the woodsman. You even whisper something to the snare, maybe a little prayer, maybe a threat. Then you set a second one, and a third. By mid-morning, you've established a fine network of amateur rabbit bothers. You sit nearby and wait, and wait, and wait. An hour passes. A bird poops on your hood. You don't move. Eventually, you check the traps. One has been tripped. Hope rises. You rush over and find a stick. A literal stick has rolled into the loop and set it off. The other two? Undisturbed. A rabbit has nibbled the bait on one and left a very rude set of tracks, as if it moonwalked away. Historians still argue whether trapping was genuinely effective for medieval commoners or more a matter of desperate optimism. The successful trappers, it's said, knew their land, their prey, and had endless patience. You have none of those, but you do have a small collection of increasingly frayed rope and something resembling a splinter in your thumb. You retie the loop, hands shaking slightly from hunger. Your last real meal was, actually you're not sure. You remember a beet, and something that might have been soup but was mostly warm water flavored by regret and a single onion peel. You decide to forage a little while the snares work their non-existent magic. You find some nettles, not ideal, but boilable, and a few with sorrel leaves, which at least taste like lemon and bad decisions. There's a mushroom that looks promising but could be either delicious or deeply fatal. You leave it alone. Dying of mushroom misidentification would be a truly embarrassing way to go, especially considering you haven't even caught anything worth poisoning yet. You boil your finds in a tiny tin pot, the kind that leaks slightly and makes everything taste faintly metallic. It's barely soup, more of a hot salad, honestly. You sip it anyway, watching steam curl up into the damp air. Just as you finish, you hear rustling again. You leap to your feet, dash to the snares, and find that one has something in it. Your heart jumps. You drop to your knees and peer inside the loop. It's a hedgehog. Somehow, the snare looped around its middle. It looks up at you, annoyed and spiny. You groan. You release it gently. It waddles off, muttering, probably, something unkind in hedgehog. You sit back, exhausted. Your stomach growls again. You're tempted, for one feral moment, to try cooking a pine cone. But no. You reset the snares, adjusting the placement with a bit more care. Maybe it's about angles. Maybe it's about bait. Maybe it's just the forest mocking you. Still, you try again. Later that afternoon, a distant sound echoes through the trees, dogs barking. The noble hunting party is circling back, clearly finding success where you find only brambles and heartbreak. You hide, of course. Peering from behind a thick yew, you watch as they trot past, laughing, holding up what appears to be a brace of hares and a very large boar. Their dogs are sleek and attentive. Their boots look dry. Their arrows are neatly arranged in feathered rows. You glance down at your own mess of gear and try not to sigh out loud. One of the nobles jokes loudly about those peasant poachers, and how they'd never last a day in the real woods. You don't throw a rock at him, but you think about it. As they pass, you slump against the tree and close your eyes. Just for a moment, you tell yourself you're listening for prey. You dream, briefly, of a magical deer that walks right up to you and lays itself politely at your feet. You wake up to find a spider has started a small web between your hand and your bow. Even the wildlife is trying to trap you now. Still, you get up, adjust your hood, try one more time. Because in the end, you're stubborn. Or maybe just tired. But you're still here. The next day arrives with a grim, gray sky and the kind of fog that soaks through your bones before you've even finished blinking. You step out from under your makeshift lean-to, a pitiful shelter of stitched-together branches and half a blanket, and immediately trip over your own bow. It's going to be a great day. You can feel it. You check your snares again. Nothing. Not even the hedgehog this time. The loops sit like little open mouths, waiting for meals they'll never taste. You mutter a few choice words. Not curse words, of course, you're medieval and modest, but the kind of muttered nonsense that lets the forest know you're not in the mood. Time to try stalking again. You pick up your bow, the one with the slightly cracked grip that pinches your palm every time you draw. You tell yourself it's part of the charm. As you walk, twigs snap beneath your boots like tiny bones. You wince. Every noise echoes through the still woods. A squirrel scolds you from a branch. Even that feels personal. You keep walking, keeping your eyes peeled for signs, hoof prints, droppings, a broken branch that might suggest an animal passed this way recently. Eventually, you find something. A track, dip fresh, was larger than a deer, more rounded. You freeze. A boar, maybe? You've heard about wild boar. Powerful, unpredictable, tusked little tanks that charge like angry furniture. You don't really want to meet one, but at this point, a showdown with a medieval war pig seems better than going another day with an empty stomach. You follow the trail, crouching low, arrow at the ready. Your feet crunch softly on frosty moss. The world narrows to a single thought: don't mess this up. Then, from a dense thicket, a shape emerges. You see it. The boar. Big, black-bristled, with glinting eyes and the general attitude of someone who just got cut off in traffic. It snorts. It sees you. You freeze. It does not. It charges. Now, historically, hunting boar was considered noble sport, but not because it was elegant, because it was dangerous. These creatures could gore even armored knights. The rich used spears and coordinated teams. You have a bow with a crooked arrow and exactly one shot. You fire. The arrow flies. It schemes past the boar's side, maybe taking a hair with it for sentiment. You leap sideways into a bush as the beast thunders past, crashing through the underbrush like a hairy battering ram. It doesn't stop. It just keeps running, probably to go tell the other animals how embarrassing you are. You lie there in the bush for a long moment, covered in burrs and shame. Later, you limp back to your camp, dragging your pride behind you like a broken wagon wheel. Historians still argue whether boar hunts were ever practical for commoners or just a fool's errand attempted out of desperation. There are records of villagers trapping boars in pits or trying to flush them out with dogs, but alone, with just a bow and too much optimism? Not exactly a winning strategy. You check your supplies. You are out of twine, out of dry wood, almost out of usable arrows. The only thing you have in abundance is time and a growing sense that the forest is laughing at you. Somewhere, probably, a squirrel is writing a ballad about your failures. You sit and try to carve a new arrow shaft from a straightish branch. Your knife is dull and your fingers are numb. Still, the work is soothing. You scrape slowly, shaping the wood with the quiet determination of someone who has no other options. Around you, the forest begins to hum. Not with actual music, just the soft symphony of birds, breeze, and far-off echoes of other people succeeding at things. You try to focus on the sounds, the rhythm of carving, the wind in the trees. You think of the stories you were told as a child, how hunters used to tame the woods, how the animals would come to them, how the best marksmen could shoot a goose mid-flight with their eyes closed. You try not to think about how your last arrow hit a tree and bounced back at your own foot. Night falls earlier than you expect. The fog thickens again. Your fire is sulky and weak. You lie back under your lean-to and stare up at the dark branches. The stars peek through, faint pinpricks that seem to say, "At least you're not dead." Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tomorrow, you'll get something. You fall asleep with one hand on your bow and the taste of boiled nettles still clinging to your tongue. The morning greets you with an unusual silence. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just a heavy stillness that presses against your ears like wool. You open your eyes, blink away the cold dew on your lashes, and sit up. Your back cracks in protest. Your hips feel like they've aged 40 years overnight. You slept on a root again, the same root you promised yourself to dig out yesterday. It won that round. You stretch, yawn, and scan the woods for movement. Nothing. No squirrel rebellions, no sarcastic deer. The only thing moving is a patch of mist, slithering low across the forest floor like it's looking for someone to haunt. You check your snares. By now, it's just muscle memory. Your expectations are so low they'd need a ladder just to reach despair. And yet, something's caught. You jog over, boots squelching slightly in the damp leaves. It's a rabbit. A real one. Small, gray, twitchy. Very much alive, and very much tangled in your makeshift snare. Your breath catches. For a brief, dazzling moment, you feel like a legend. Like the forest has finally decided to pity you. You kneel, heart thumping. It's hopping around, panicked, trying to escape. You know you have to act quickly. But here's the thing. Catching an animal is one part of the job. What comes next? Well, no one ever talks about that. You hesitate. The rabbit looks at you with those glossy black eyes, small nose twitching like it's trying to sniff out your soul. You murmur something, an apology, maybe. Then you do what you must. Afterward, your hands are shaking. Your stomach twists, not from hunger this time, but from the weight of it all. Historians still argue whether peasant hunters formed emotional bonds with their prey or if that's just modern projection. But in that moment, crouched in the cold, you understand why someone might pause before every arrow, every snare. It's not just about survival. It's about cost. You clean the rabbit as best you can, fingers clumsy and unsure. You're not trained for this. You've only ever watched others do it, once or twice, from a distance. Eventually, it's done. You build a better fire this time, small and hot, with coals tucked under dry wood. You roast the meat slowly, turning it with a stick, watching fat sizzle into the flames. It smells heavenly. It's the first proper meal you've had in days. The first warm thing that isn't nettles or forest broth. You chew slowly, savoring every bite, trying not to wolf it down. You feel full. Not stuffed, but satisfied. And that feeling spreads through you like warmth in winter. For the first time, you feel like maybe, just maybe, you're not entirely terrible at this. You spend the afternoon reshaping your camp. You reinforce the lean-to with extra branches, cover the roof with damp moss to keep the wind out, and build a little windbreak near the fire. Nothing fancy, but now it looks more like a base and less like a woodland accident. Later, you even manage to fix one of your arrows using a flint shard and a broken feather. It's slightly crooked, but so are you, and you're still functioning. By dusk, the forest seems to have softened. The same trees that loomed and mocked now sway gently above you like sleepy guardians. The wind doesn't bite quite so hard. The silence feels less like a threat and more like a blanket. But you know not to get cocky. Tomorrow could bring rain. Or more noblemen trampling through, their dogs scattering game for miles. Or nothing at all, just another long day of empty traps and near misses. Still, tonight, you allow yourself the rare luxury of a little hope. You sit by the fire and think about your place in all this. You, the lone hunter who mostly misses, the joke of the forest. And yet, somehow, still here. There's a kind of dignity in that. You recall a story an old man once told you in the village, about a hunter who wandered into the woods for 7 years and returned with silver hair and stories of talking animals. No one believed him, of course. But you wonder now, as you stare into the coals, whether the real transformation wasn't in the story, but in the solitude. You're changing too. Slowly, quietly. The forest is still winning, but you're starting to learn the rules. You tuck your bough beside you, lean back against your slightly sturdier shelter, and close your eyes. The fire crackles softly. A single owl hoots in the distance, like a punctuation mark at the end of a strange, satisfying sentence. Sleep comes faster tonight, and when it does, you dream of rabbits that cook themselves and offer to do the dishes after. You awake to the sharp scent of wet earth and pine needles, the kind of smell that fills your lungs with chilly comfort even when your toes threaten frostbite. Your limbs protest again, but you push the aches aside. Today is another day to prove the forest wrong. Today, you decide to try your luck with birds. Pheasants, partridges, and the occasional grouse wander the woods, and they're smaller targets than boar or deer. Maybe easier to catch too, though you've learned that easier in medieval hunting is relative, like saying a thorn is easier than a spike. You quietly tiptoe through the underbrush, bow in hand, eyes scanning the canopy. The light filters through the leaves, casting dappled shadows that seem to dance just beyond your sight. Suddenly, a flash of russet wings catches your attention. A pheasant flits up from the brush and lands on a low branch, its bright feathers gleaming. You freeze, heart pounding. This is it, the perfect shot. You raise your bow slowly, draw the string back, and aim. Then the pheasant sneezes. Seriously. Right then. You barely have time to blink before it flaps away, looking insulted. You lower your bow and let out a soft laugh. The forest's sense of humor is cruel but consistent. You follow the bird's flight path, hoping for another chance. Hours pass. Your legs ache from crouching and creeping. Your stomach rumbles, a reminder that hunting, while noble, is exhausting and occasionally humiliating. When you finally find a quiet clearing, you set a crude bird trap, a loop of twine balanced on a stick, baited with a few grains stolen from the granary. You hide behind a bush and wait, trying not to shiver as the sun slips lower. A few minutes in, a curious magpie flutters nearby. It inspects your trap, pecks at the bait, then caws loudly before flying off, likely telling every bird within earshot about your pathetic snares. You sigh and rub your hands together, trying to warm them. Historians still argue whether bird hunting was a practical food source for peasants or mainly a pastime for the gentry. Some say trapping small birds provided a welcome protein boost in lean months. Others claim it was too unreliable for anything more than emergency snacking. Either way, you're hungry enough to try anything. Nightfall closes in, and you pack up your trap. No birds caught, but at least you didn't get caught by a boar this time. As you head back to your camp, you pass by a trickling stream. You kneel to drink, the cold water shocking your dry throat into alertness. Nearby, a family of ducks paddles lazily, unconcerned by your presence. You watch them for a moment, envying their simple, water-bound lives. Back at camp, you huddle by your modest fire, carefully cooking the last of your nettles and wild greens. You reflect on the day, the near misses, the quiet moments, the occasional absurdity of sneezing pheasants and gossiping magpies. Being a medieval hunter who keeps missing is less about skill and more about resilience. You're learning to survive not by triumph but by persistence, and by finding moments of humor, even in failure. Your bow rests beside you, crooked and scarred, like an old friend who's seen better days but still shows up when it counts. You lean back against your shelter and let the evening's cool hush settle over you. Sleep beckons, soft and necessary. You close your eyes and imagine the forest not as an enemy, but as an ancient storyteller, whispering secrets just out of reach. And maybe, someday, you'll catch not just prey, but the stories too. You awake to a crisp dawn, the kind that pinches your cheeks and makes your breath hang like tiny clouds in the air. The chill carries a freshness, a sharp clarity that shakes off the fog of sleep better than any rude alarm. As your eyes adjust, the forest around you seems calmer today, less of a looming adversary and more a quiet companion, draped in gentle pinks and golds spilling from the pale sky. You rub the last vestiges of sleep from your eyes, feeling the coarse fabric of your tunic against your skin, and notice the tender light promising a fair day ahead. The world outside your shelter hums softly, the faint chirp of early birds, the distant rustle of branches stirred by an unseen breeze, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot reminding you that the forest is never truly silent. This subtle orchestra is a quiet balm for your weary spirit, a reminder of why you endure the long cold nights, the empty stomachs, and the repeated misses. Today, you decide to scout a new area, farther from your usual haunts, a patch of the woods that's whispered about but seldom explored. The path is less traveled, and the undergrowth grows thick and tangled, weaving a dense curtain of brambles and ferns that seems to hold its secrets tight. Your boots snag on twisted roots, your hands brushing against prickly shrubs as you push forward, each step feeling like a small victory in this slow, deliberate dance with the wilderness. You listen to the forest's slow awakening, the hum of insects stirring beneath leaf litter, the flutter of a bird's wings high above, the soft crunch of leaves as a distant creature moves unseen. You pause for a moment, taking it all in, breathing in the cool, earthy scent of damp soil mixed with pine and moss. These moments are why you come back, day after day, even when the game slips away. It's not just about the catch, it's about belonging to this living, breathing world. Eventually, you come upon a small clearing where sunlight filters through the branches, casting gentle spotlights on patches of wild garlic and early bluebells swaying in a faint breeze. The air here feels almost sacred, a quiet sanctuary amid the chaos of the thicket. You lower yourself onto a mossy log, its soft cushion a welcome relief, and pull out your crude map. Nothing fancy, just a weathered piece of parchment with rough sketches and charcoal notes tracking your progress and marking spots of interest. You pore over your makeshift guide, fingers tracing the meandering stream that curves through the woods and the rocky ridge beyond it, rumored among villagers as a prime spot for trapping rabbits. You consider which route to take next, balancing the lure of the unknown against the cautious knowledge of familiar grounds. Just as you're about to move, a sudden rustle nearby freezes you in place, heart thudding in your chest. Out from the bushes steps a fox, lean, bright-eyed, with a coat gleaming like burnished copper caught in the morning sun. It pauses, fixing you with a curious stare that holds a strange mix of intelligence and mischief. You hold your breath, unwilling to spook it, and for a moment, the forest and the wild creature seem locked in quiet conversation. The fox doesn't flee. Instead, it tilts its head in that sly, knowing way foxes do, then trots away slowly, glancing back as if inviting you to follow. You consider it carefully. Folklore paints foxes as cunning tricksters, sometimes guides, sometimes deceivers, but today, the animal's calm confidence feels like an unexpected offer of assistance. With a soft smile, you decide to accept this silent invitation. You rise, moving cautiously after the fox through tangled thickets and over fallen logs slick with moss. The soft patting of its paws ahead of you is a strange reassurance, a whispered promise that maybe this day could be different. After a careful trek, the fox leads you to a dense thicket, hidden from casual eyes, where you spot the telltale signs of rabbit burrows. The small holes, edged with nibbled leaves and freshly turned earth, speak of recent activity. Your pulse quickens with cautious hope. This could be a good spot to set traps, maybe even catch a meal tonight. You gather slender branches and rough twine from nearby bushes, weaving simple snares with practiced hands. The repetitive task calms your nerves and fills you with a quiet optimism you haven't felt in days. Maybe today the forest is finally offering a small victory. As you work, the sun climbs higher, warming your back and coaxing the chill from your bones. The forest no longer feels like a wild obstacle but a partner in your slow dance of survival, sometimes teasing, sometimes rewarding. You remember hearing that historians still argue whether medieval hunters relied more on intuition and animal behavior or sheer luck. Your experience tells you it's a bit of both, but above all, it's patience, the willingness to listen, watch, and wait. By evening, you return to camp tired but hopeful, the snares set and your spirit lifted by the day's unexpected guidance. You think back to the fox's visit, nature's subtle nudge, a reminder that sometimes help comes in the quietest forms. You lean against your shelter, the fatigue of the day washing over you like a gentle wave. Outside, the night sounds rise, a lullaby of chirping crickets, rustling leaves, and the distant call of owls starting their watch. The forest breathes with you, a shared rhythm of calm and rest. You close your eyes, comforted by the thought that even a hunter who keeps missing can find small victories along the way. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow the forest will smile back a little more kindly. The dawn's light slips through your makeshift shelter, pulling you awake with the soft insistence of a mother calling her child. The birds have already started their morning rituals, warbling from the treetops, flitting from branch to branch like they've got deadlines. Your bones protest the night's chill, cracking and creaking as you stretch your limbs. You yawn deeply, the sort of yawn that feels like it comes from somewhere near your spine. You're not well rested, but you're rested enough. Today, you decide, will be different. You're going to try your luck with fishing. Not the high-skill, net casting, spear-perfect kind of fishing the noblemen get to do on their summer estates. No fine rods, no carved lures from exotic bone. Just you, some hope, and a half-splintered spear you've lovingly whittled from a crooked branch that's probably more decorative than functional. The village elder once told you that hunting isn't just about chasing creatures in the woods. Sometimes it's about stillness, about patience, about waiting by the water's edge, listening to it whisper, and hoping it gives you something in return. You've never been good with patience. You wrap a fraying length of nettle twine around your belt, just in case inspiration strikes and you decide to try line fishing. Not likely, but hey, miracles happen. You trudge through the underbrush, the ground soft with morning dew, your boots still damp from yesterday's ill-advised shortcut through the bog. By the time you reach the stream, the sun has fully breached the trees, casting golden light over the rippling water. It's a beautiful spot. Peaceful. The kind of place where even the most stubborn fish should want to be caught. You find a natural pool where the current slows and deepens, framed by smooth stones and shady reeds. You crouch down, peering into the clear water. You can see them, sleek, slippery shadows flickering between rocks, taunting you with every lazy flick of their fins. You steady your breath, grip the spear tightly, and wait some more. The first attempt is laughable. You lunge too early, the splash louder than you expected. The fish scatter like rumors at a royal banquet. You try again, and again, and again. At this point, the fish might be laughing. You're certainly not. Your arms ache, your shoulders are sore, and you've gotten more water up your sleeves than you care to admit. The spear feels heavier with every attempt, as if it's absorbing your frustration. By midday, your stomach is a gaping chasm of disappointment, growling its own protest as you plop down on a mossy bank. The sun filters through the leaves in scattered shafts, warming your back while you stare at the stream like it personally betrayed you. Fishing is harder than it looks, especially without the fancy equipment or the privilege of access. You think about the laws you've heard villagers grumble about, how fishing rights often belonged to the local lord, and how peasants needed a license just to cast a line. Not that they could always afford one, or keep one. Many just poached in secret, quietly hauling trout and carp in the early hours, praying no one saw. Because if they did, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it could be fines, punishment, maybe even time in the stocks. Imagine that, not only did you not catch your dinner, you also get a free public shaming. Delightful. Historians still argue whether rivers were truly lifelines for food or more important as social centers, where people gathered to gossip, trade, and occasionally dunk their younger siblings. You look up from the water and see a heron standing not 20 feet away, perfectly still, poised in a ballet of tension and elegance. Its patience is enviable. It waits without a hint of frustration, neck stretched, eyes focused. Then, flash. A blur of motion, and a silver fish wriggles in its beak. Shof. You sigh. Some creatures are simply built for this. Around you, life continues with quiet certainty. Dragonflies hover like tiny, jeweled helicopters. Water striders skim the surface like they're late to a meeting. A family of ducks floats by, utterly unimpressed with your presence. You even spot a muskrat, who gives you what you swear is a judgmental side-eye before diving under a root. You shift your position and give the spear one more try. You lean in arm raised. Of course. You wonder if the fish are telling each other about you. Warning the newcomers, avoid the flailing human, he's all splash and no catch. Eventually, you abandon the spear and try to weave a makeshift line with your nettle rope and a hook carved from a thorn. It takes nearly half an hour and resembles a tangled mess, but you drop it into the water with quiet hope. Nothing. More time passes. The sun climbs and begins its descent. Your patience thins. Your fingers are pruned. You've managed to catch exactly one thing. A slimy, rotting stick that gave you false hope when the line twitched. At this point, you could swear the river is playing jokes on you. Still, something inside you softens. Maybe it's the rhythm of the water, or the warmth of the sun, or the faint realization that, while you may be failing spectacularly at fishing, you're at least failing in a beautiful place. You remember the village priest saying once that time spent in nature is time spent with God, or, at the very least, time spent not doing chores. You lean back, letting your legs dangle over the edge of the bank, feeling the grass tickle your calves. The sky above is slowly being painted with the dusky hues of approaching evening, lavender, amber, rose gold. The kind of sky that makes you pause just for a breath. Your belly growls again, but you find yourself less frustrated. There's something about surrendering to the moment, to the fact that you can't force the fish, or life, really, to cooperate. You pack your things slowly, reverently, as if the failure itself deserves respect. You thank the river aloud, just in case it's listening. Maybe it appreciates manners. The walk back to camp is quiet, peaceful. You notice things you didn't this morning. A cluster of mushrooms you might gather later, the faint print of a deer hoof in the mud, the buzz of cicadas rising in waves. When you return, the campfire is a welcome friend. You light it carefully, feeding it with twigs and dry moss until it crackles to life. You sit cross-legged beside it, warming your hands and sipping nettle tea from a cracked clay cup. It's not the meal you dreamed of, but it soothes something deeper than hunger. You chew a few dried roots from your forage pouch. They taste like sadness and bark, but they're filling enough. You wrap your moss blanket around your shoulders and tilt your head back to watch the stars begin to peek through the veil of twilight. Tonight, the forest feels like it's holding its breath. Or maybe it's just holding you. You can almost pretend the hunger is part of the lesson. You lie down slowly, one bone at a time, feeling the ground cradle you as if it remembers every hunter who's ever missed. The soft gurgle of the stream echoes faintly in the distance. And as you drift toward sleep, you wonder, not desperately, not angrily, but curiously, if tomorrow's catch might be just around the bend, waiting patiently for you to stop trying so hard. Because maybe that's the trick. You stop chasing. You start listening. And maybe, just maybe, the river will finally offer something back. Morning breaks are gray and misty, the kind of morning that softens every edge, dulls every sound, and makes even the birds think twice before chirping. It's the kind of cloak you need, one that lets you blend in, disappear, become a whisper among the trees. You roll over beneath your moss and hide blanket and groan. There's a new ache in your shoulder, a souvenir from yesterday's wanderings. It's the kind of soreness that makes you wonder if you've been carrying your bow wrong all week, or maybe your body's just getting tired of pretending it's something it's not, namely, a successful hunter. You stretch your arms, feel the creaks and cracks that come with sleeping on the forest floor, and shake the stiffness from your legs. The forest greets you with damp air and a low-hanging fog that clings to your clothes before you've even moved. Still, there's something calming in the quiet. No church bells, no village gossip, just the low murmur of trees and the occasional patter of a falling acorn. You decide that today, you'll shift your strategy. You won't wait in ambush or rely on a lucky rustle. You'll try tracking. The village elders always made it look easy, gliding over leaves like spirits, spotting a bent blade of grass and knowing exactly what passed by, how long ago, and whether it had a limp. You're not quite at that level. Still, you give it a go. You tighten your belt, adjust your quiver, and set off toward a part of the woods you haven't scoured in days. Your eyes are glued to the ground, scanning for signs, a muddy impression, a snapped twig, a patch of disturbed moss. You spot something quickly, a faint print half filled with rainwater, and crouch to examine it like it might whisper secrets. It could be deer, or boar, or a very clumsy peasant, which, given your luck, feels like the most likely answer. You choose to believe it's game. Hope is a powerful delusion. The trail winds through undergrowth and soft pine needles, and every step forward feels like a gamble. You pass a fallen log where something's clearly brushed against it recently, Bits of fur cling to the bark, and you try not to let excitement override caution. You crouch lower now, letting your knees absorb the weight as you creep forward. It's not elegant, it's not quiet, but it's yours. As the trail leads you to a small clearing, your heart picks up its pace. You freeze behind a tree, breathing through your mouth to keep the noise down. And then movement. A flash of brown, quick and low to the ground. Your fingers twitch to your quiver, draw an arrow, notch it to the string, but the moment you blink, it's gone. You step out and watch helplessly as the creature vanishes into the underbrush. You don't even get a clear look. Could have been a deer. Might have been a fox. Might have been a figment of your fog-addled imagination. You lower your bow, frustration bubbling up in your chest. Not in an angry way, more like an exhausted sigh that works its way into your bones. You mutter something under your breath, something suitably medieval and mildly blasphemous, and kick a small rock for good measure. You stand there a moment longer, staring at the spot where your chance evaporated. It's not just about spotting tracks, you realize. It's about timing, silence, wind direction, patience, and, perhaps most importantly, a big helping of luck, which, frankly, seems to avoid you like the plague avoids a healthy village. You decide to take a break and crouch beside a moss-covered boulder. The forest smells rich and layered, wet leaves, pine sap, something faintly floral. The fog dampens every sound, makes everything feel closer and quieter. You close your eyes and just listen. A distant woodpecker. The tiny crackle of leaves under squirrel feet. Your own breath. Hunting, you remember, isn't just about food. It's about presence. Connection. Being so attuned to your surroundings that the line between you and the woods blurs a little. That kind of attunement takes time, years, if not lifetimes. Historians still argue about how much medieval hunters relied on scent versus sight. Some claim trained noses were an essential part of the tracker's toolkit, humans using every sense, just like dogs. Others suggest that visual clues, like disturbed leaves or animal scat, were far more commonly trusted. One thing certain, though, if medieval villagers could have seen you now, poking the ground with a stick and sniffing the air like a confused hedgehog, you wouldn't exactly inspire confidence. Still you persist. You mark the clearing with a small pile of stones, partly so you can return later, partly just to say, I was here and I almost didn't mess it up. You begin the walk back as the light shifts from misty gray to gold-streaked green. Your footsteps fall more naturally now, less with frustration, more with reluctant acceptance. You didn't catch anything, but you saw more, learn more. You felt the forest breathe, and for a few minutes, you breathed with it. By the time you reach camp, the mist has lifted, revealing a clear, pale sky. You set your bow down with care and turn to your nightly ritual. A small fire, a few sharpened arrows, the quiet rhythm of blade against shaft. The smoke curls into the air, mingling with the scent of wood and sweat and damp wool. You lie back beneath your mossy roof and pull your cloak tighter around you. Your shoulder still aches. Your belly still rumbles. But your thoughts are calmer, steadier. The forest didn't give you a meal today, but it gave you something else, practice. A little progress. A faint glimmer that maybe next time you'll get it right. And as your eyes close, you dream of clear tracks in soft earth, of light footsteps and steady aim, of finally stepping out of the woods with more than a story to tell. You wake to the faint cry of crows cawing overhead, a sound that's become oddly familiar and somehow comforting, like a persistent yet non-judgmental alarm clock. They don't care how many times you've missed your mark. They just keep circling, watching, occasionally judging with beady-eyed indifference. Today, you decide to shift gears. No more chasing shadows through the underbrush. No more sneaking through wet leaves just to startle a squirrel. Today is a day for crafting, because if you're going to keep missing, you might as well miss with style. Your gear isn't going to improve itself, and you've certainly had enough time to reflect on its many shortcomings. You gather your battered bow and a sad collection of arrows, setting them down like old friends in need of a pep talk. The bow's once elegant curve now shows signs of fatigue, faint splinters near the grip, a string that groans with every draw, and a finish rubbed dull by too many damp mornings and not enough maintenance. The arrows? Well, half have feathers missing, a few are bent, and at least one appears to be held together with sheer optimism. You settle near the fire, the crackling logs giving off just enough warmth to make sitting still bearable. You pull a straight, supple branch from your stash, one you carefully selected a few days ago while pretending to track a deer, and begin to whittle. The soft rasp of blade against wood quickly becomes a rhythm, a subtle beat that fills the morning air. There's something almost sacred about the process. Your hands move slowly but with growing confidence, shaving down the shaft until it begins to resemble something functional. This work is quiet, repetitive, and surprisingly soothing. There's a calm here that the hunt doesn't offer. No pressure, no sudden movements, no need to outwit creatures far more observant than you. Just you, your knife, and the pleasant illusion that maybe, just maybe, you'll end up with something worth firing. You recall stories of medieval bowyers, those rare artisans who dedicated their lives to mastering this craft. It wasn't just a trade, it was an art. Selecting the right wood, seasoning it for months or even years, bending it just so, there was no rushing the process. Some villages had a designated bowyer, often treated with the same reverence as the blacksmith or healer. You, of course, are not that person. You're just the hunter who misses often enough to need a hobby. Still, as you shape the arrow shaft and start on the nock, you begin to see the appeal. There's something immensely satisfying about turning a random stick into a working tool, like playing a quiet game with time. You pause for a sip of water and glance at your sorry pile of arrows, then back to the one in your hands. It's not perfect. The fletching is crooked and the balance is slightly off. But it's an improvement, and right now, that's more than enough. As you continue working, you remember reading, or perhaps overhearing in a tavern, about the strange materials medieval hunters sometimes used. While metal arrowheads were the standard, they weren't always available or affordable. Bone tips were surprisingly common, especially for small game. Some even used glass shards, carefully shaped and secured, though those were fragile and risky. Effective in a pinch, but definitely not something you'd want bouncing around in your quiver. You pick up one of your duller arrows and try to imagine fashioning a tip from a deer antler. It's doable, probably. You'd need a good grinding stone and more patience than you usually have before your second cup of morning gruel. Feathers, too, were a matter of debate. Not all birds were created equal when it came to fletching. Goose feathers were a favorite, strong, flexible, and long enough to shape easily. But sometimes, you'd find hunters collecting crow feathers, pigeon feathers, even owl feathers if they were lucky, or sneaky, enough to find one. Folklore said that owl feathers helped your arrows fly silently, You're not sure if that's true, but it's a lovely thought. Historians still argue whether arrow making was a widespread skill among peasants or something mostly handled by designated tradesmen. On one hand, it seems practical that every hunter would know the basics. On the other, given how uneven your work is, you're inclined to believe most folks left it to the pros. At least if they had the coin for it. The afternoon sun filters through the trees, casting golden light on your work area. You've finished 3 new arrows. Not perfect, not beautiful, but straight enough to fly and sharp enough to matter. You test their balance, flicking each one gently between your fingers. The last one feels just right, a small triumph. You string your bow, holding your breath as you nock an arrow. A makeshift target, a round chunk of bark nailed unceremoniously to a tree, waits about 15 paces away. You draw back slowly, feeling the familiar creak of the string, and release. You blink. You actually hit the center. Well, near the center. Close enough that you let out a soft laugh, the kind that escapes without permission. You fire again. And again. A few misses, sure. But more hits than usual. Maybe it's the arrows. Maybe it's the mindset. Or maybe the forest is feeling generous today. By the time the sun begins to dip below the trees, you've emptied your quiver twice and retrieved every arrow, even the one that went rogue into the underbrush. Your fingers are sore, your back aches, but there's a warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with the fire. As night falls, you crawl under your moss blanket and let your muscles relax. The air is cool but gentle, the kind of night that carries no expectations. Just rest. Outside, the crows have gone quiet. In their place, a gentle breeze stirs the leaves, joined by the soft hoot of a distant owl. The forest sings its slow, steady lullaby, and you, the not-so-hapless hunter, drift off to sleep with the faint scent of wood shavings still clinging to your fingertips. The morning light filters through the trees, painting your camp in soft gold. You wake, bones stiff but your spirit a little less bruised. Today you resolve you'll try something different, setting snares. You sit up slowly, stretching under your threadbare blanket, and glance around at the sleepy hush of the forest. There's a different kind of stillness today, like the woods themselves are waiting to see what you'll try next. Snares are simple traps, loops of twine placed carefully along animal trails, designed to catch passing rabbits or hares by the leg. They require less chasing and more patience, 2 things you desperately need to learn. And let's be honest, you could use a win, even if it's just a scrawny rabbit. You rummage through your satchel for the coil of twine you bartered for in the village weeks ago, coarse, scratchy stuff made from hemp or flax. It's already fraying in places, but it'll do. You gather thin branches for supports and start crafting your first snare, your fingers stiff and clumsy in the morning cold. It's fiddly work, tying knots that must hold firm but give way at just the right moment. You frown, undo, retie, undo again. It takes longer than you thought. Everything does out here. Eventually, you manage 3 usable snares and head out. You remember advice from older hunters. Look for narrow trails where grass is flattened or leaves are disturbed, places where paws press quietly through the underbrush. You kneel, placing one snare by a bend in a trail near a cluster of burdock, another at the edge of a bramble thicket, and the third near a patch of clover rabbits have clearly been nibbling. You camouflage them with care, just enough to blend in, not enough to block. Then you retreat to a hidden spot behind a moss-covered log. You settle in, tucking your legs beneath you, and wait. The forest holds its breath with you. Minutes stretch into an hour. Nothing happens. No twitch of ears, no crunch of leaves, just bird song and the soft rustle of a breeze weaving through the trees. You try to stay still, but your thoughts bounce like startled deer. You wonder if the rabbit you hope for is sitting nearby in a thicket, smugly watching you bungle the art of snaring. You sip some cold water from your flask and lean back, gaze drifting upward. Sunlight filters through the canopy in shifting patterns, golden and green. It's oddly hypnotic. Time slows. Your heartbeat quiets. The forest's pace isn't yours, and maybe it never will be. But you're learning to match it little by little. Historians still argue whether peasants used snares mainly for subsistence or whether they were viewed more as a seasonal skill, used cautiously to avoid fines or the wrath of the local lord. Some sources suggest snares were considered unmanly among higher status hunters, more like trickery than sport. Others believe they were regulated by strict village customs. Don't trap too close to someone else's land, always share your catch if you borrow a trail. You shift slightly, scratching a mosquito bite, and wonder if the rabbits hold council meetings to discuss your incompetence. Another hour passes. Still nothing. Eventually, a faint tug on one of the snares jolts you upright. Your pulse leaps. You move slowly, stealthy, deliberate, every leaf crunch amplified in your mind. You reach the trap. A twig, just a twig, snapped and tangled in the loop. You exhale, somewhere between a groan and a chuckle. Even the forest's humor has a dry edge. But you don't feel entirely defeated. There was something calming in the waiting, a rhythm to it. You make a note to fix that particular loop, maybe tighten it, adjust the angle. Next time, as dusk creeps in, you revisit each snare. All empty, not even a stray feather or tuft of fur. Still, you check them carefully, reset a knot or two, then collect the snares for the night. You head back to camp with slow steps. Your stomach growls, but you're not as discouraged as you were the day before. Maybe it's because for once, you weren't chasing. You were watching, listening. You start a fire, its glow warming your hands and chasing away the forest's creeping chill. From your pouch, you pull some dried herbs, wild mint and chamomile, and steep them in a small tin cup of water. The scent rises immediately, earthy and sweet, curling in the air like a lullaby. As the fire crackles gently beside you, you sip the tea, letting the warmth settle your body. Your shoulders sink, your hands unclench. Even the mosquitoes seem to have backed off for the evening. You lie back beneath your shelter of bent branches and cloth, gaze tilted toward the darkening canopy above. The night's soundtrack begins, frogs croaking lazily, crickets chirping in soft rhythms, an occasional owl calling out in the distance. Though your snares caught nothing, you caught a glimpse of something more elusive, patience. And perhaps trust, in the forest, in yourself, in the slow, invisible progress you're making out here. The stars peek through the trees, distant and indifferent. You don't need their approval. You only need the courage to keep waking up and trying again. You shift into your moss blanket, cradled by the earth's gentle hush. Your eyes flutter closed, breath evening out. And maybe with a bit more time, the forest's quiet secrets will unfold. You drift towards sleep, comforted by the soft rustle of leaves and the hope of a better hunt tomorrow. You wake to a chill in the air, The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you grateful for the thin layer of moss you've managed to gather beneath you. It's not luxurious, more of a suggestion of a mattress than an actual cushion, but it's better than dirt alone. Your breath fogs gently in the dim morning light as you sit up and stretch, your limbs stiff from another restless night spent beneath the stars. Today, you decide to explore the strange world of medieval hunting rituals. Because if you're going to keep missing, you might as well understand the superstitions that supposedly helped improve the odds. At this point, you'll take all the cosmic help you can get. Your belly grumbles from another light dinner, and you wonder if the forest gods take pity on persistent but inept hunters. Before heading into the woods, you kneel and perform a small ritual passed down by an old crone in your village. The kind of woman people go to for healing teas, whispered fortunes, and advice on warts. You trace a circle in the dirt with a smooth stick, muttering a few words you barely understand. Most of it sounds like garden herbs and gibberish, but you whisper them with the tone of someone who hopes someone, or something, is listening. You leave a humble offering of berries and a few hazelnuts, arranged neatly on a flat stone. It feels silly, yes, but also oddly calming, like brushing your teeth before bed even when you know you're not seeing anyone tomorrow. The medieval mind was soaked in ritual. Nature wasn't just a backdrop, it was alive, moody, and full of unseen forces. You didn't just walk into the woods with your bow and hope for the best. You tried to make a deal first. Hunters carried lucky charms, rabbits' feet tucked into leather pouches, feathers braided into their cloaks, tiny carved totems in the shapes of owls or wolves. Some even carried dried fox tails or knotted cords soaked in wine, each one with a story, each one with a promise. You try to imagine the weight of it all, the deep mix of superstition, faith, and quiet desperation. When you're hungry and out of options, a whispered plea to the trees might feel more powerful than any sharpened arrow. As you push into the forest, your eyes scan not just for prey, but for omens. A crooked tree, a stack of stones that couldn't have formed by accident, a rock shaped just a little too much like a face, any of these might be a sign. Some hunters believed such places marked thin spots, where the barrier between this world and the world of spirits was fragile. You'd best leave a gift, or at least a respectful silence. You pause near a twisted oak whose gnarled trunk bends like an elbow mid-gesture. It looks like it could be pointing somewhere, or warning you away. You leave a small offering, a handful of acorns, still warm from your pocket. There's something about the gesture that feels right. Less like superstition now, and more like a quiet conversation with the forest itself. The wind picks up slightly, rustling the branches above in a soft, wordless whisper. Whether it's coincidence or something more, you nod once before moving on. Historians still argue whether such rituals were truly common among medieval hunters or if they're the exaggerated flourishes of later storytellers. Was the average peasant really bowing to tree spirits and crafting feathered charms? Or was it just a handful of eccentric woodsmen whose stories were passed down, polished by time? Truth be told, the line between practical habit and magical thinking wasn't always so clear. By midday, you're still empty-handed, unless you count pine needles in your hair and a few more scratches on your boots, but your mood is lighter. It's hard to explain. Maybe it's the fresh air, maybe it's the small satisfaction of having done something, anything, to tip the scales. Maybe the forest really does appreciate a little respect. You can't say for sure, but your senses feel sharper. You notice the subtle patterns in birdsong, the sudden silence when a fox pads by somewhere nearby. You catch the glint of sunlight off wet leaves and the blur of movement in the ferns. You start to feel like the forest is watching you too, not in a threatening way, but in a curious one, like it's trying to decide whether you belong here or not. You find yourself walking more carefully, treading softly, pausing now and then to listen instead of charging ahead like you used to. As the sun begins its descent, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and lavender, you return to your makeshift camp. Your hands are empty, but your head feels full of thoughts, of questions, of something not quite named. You warm a simple broth over your tiny fire, stirring it slowly, the wooden spoon clicking gently against the pot's edge. The meal is modest. Wild garlic, a bit of root vegetable, and a pinch of salt you've hoarded like treasure. But tonight it feels like a feast. Maybe it's the ritual. Maybe it's just hunger seasoning everything. You sip the broth, wrapped in your cloak, firelight dancing on your face. The forest murmurs around you, alive with the sounds of nightfall, crickets, wind, the occasional crack of a branch far off. Lying down once again on your moss bed, you pull the cloak tighter and breathe deeply. The night smells of pine, smoke, and damp earth. You think about the strange balance between skill and luck, muscle and myth, logic and lore. It's a dance medieval hunters knew all too well, a delicate waltz with the wild, where each missed shot felt less like failure and more like part of a larger conversation. Tonight, sleep comes easily. Not because you succeeded, but because you tried, with care, with respect, with a whispered chant to no one in particular. And sometimes that's enough. The dawn breaks softly through the canopy, the filtered light casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. You rise slowly, stretching out your stiff limbs, muscles quietly protesting after yesterday's long, fruitless hike. The forest feels gentle this morning, moist, earthy, and oddly forgiving. Perhaps today will be different. Perhaps the game will come easily. But let's be honest, you've said that before. This morning, though, a new idea takes root. You've been doing this solo for too long. It's time to consider the one companion who might actually improve your odds, not just talk your ear off or steal your last strip of dried meat. You decide it's time to learn about medieval hunting companions, the dogs. In the village, old tales are told around firesides about remarkable hounds that could chase down deer, corner boars, or flush rabbits from dense thickets like it was child's play. These weren't pets as we know them today. They were tools, treasured tools, but tools nonetheless. Still, there was affection there too, the kind of unspoken loyalty between creature and human that forms when your bellies and lives depend on each other. Unfortunately, you don't have one of those miracle hounds. You have Thistle. Thistle is a mutt, a shaggy, brownish-gray mystery of a dog who wandered into your camp 3 winters ago and never left. He has the energy of a mossy log and the hunting instincts of a particularly disinterested pillow. You glance at him now, lying upside down on his back, paws flopped in the air like he's auditioning to be a doorstop. His one visible eye opens halfway. He yawns. You sigh. Still, it's not fair to compare him to the hounds of the nobles or even the better-off villagers. Dogs were expensive. Feeding one meant dividing your already meager scraps. Training one meant time you didn't have and skills you might never gain. But those who had them, those lucky few, understood their worth. You imagine the bond, a hunter and his dog, stalking through the misty underbrush, silent but alert, each attuned to the other. The subtle flick of a wrist to send the dog left. A soft whistle to freeze. A hand signal to charge. That kind of partnership could mean the difference between returning with dinner or explaining once again to your family why they're eating boiled turnips. Today, you're not hunting alone. You decide to visit old Gerard, a stooped but sharp-eyed farmer on the far side of the woods. Gerard owns a hound named Bramble, a lean, russet creature with keen eyes and even keener instincts. People say Bramble once cornered a fox under a collapsed hay cart and barked until someone came to help haul it out. Some say that dog's smarter than half the village men. You make your way there, Thistle in tow, lumbering behind you like a furry sack of flour. Gerard greets you with a toothless grin, the kind that still manages to look knowing. Come to see real hunting? He rasps, patting Bramble's side. The hound stands, alert and taut, his tail flicking with anticipation. You nod, watching as Gerard leads him toward the treeline. At the forest's edge, Gerard points to a nearby thicket. He gives a quick whistle and a low word, just one syllable, and Bramble shoots forward like a fired arrow. The change is immediate. His body drops low, ears twitching, nose to the ground, reading the trail like a book only he can see. You stand silent, awestruck by the grace of it. Minutes pass. Then, from deeper in the brush, a flurry of motion, leaves rustle, twigs snap, and Bramble returns, bounding triumphantly with a rabbit clenched gently in his jaws. Gerard barely smiles. This is just another Tuesday for him and Bramble. You're less calm. You crouch to admire the dog's catch, not just for its usefulness, though the meat alone would have fed you well, but for the quiet choreography that just played out. It's the subtleties that impress you, the way Bramble paused and sniffed the air mid-run, the way he followed a zigzag path instead of a straight line, the way he responded to Gerard's barely audible clicks and hand movements. There's a whole language there. A dance. Historians still argue how common these skilled dogs really were among peasants. Some say well-trained hounds were the province of the nobility, another marker of status and privilege. Others believe even modest villages pooled their resources to keep a few good dogs for communal hunting. You're inclined to think it depended on the village and the dog, and maybe the generosity of the gods on any given day. On the walk back, Thistle attempts to trot along next to Bramble, trying, poorly, to mimic his gait. Bramble doesn't even look at him. You half expect Thistle to fall asleep mid-stride. Back at your camp, you toss a small bone Gerard gave you in thanks for helping carry firewood. Thistle perks up and trots over, accepts it with a single lazy chomp, and drops it beside his favorite sleeping patch. You laugh softly. He may not be Bramble, but he's loyal and he's yours. You sit quietly, watching the last of the afternoon light filter through the trees. The forest seems to approve of your company tonight. Birds chirp lazily, and the air smells of moss and pine and maybe just a hint of change. You wonder, just for a moment, if Thistle might surprise you someday. Maybe he has one good chase left in him. Maybe not. But tonight, you don't mind either way. As night falls, the woods settle once more into their lullaby hum, and the last sound you hear before sleep takes you is Thistle's soft snore, rising and falling like the wind through the trees. The morning mist clings to the trees like a damp curtain as you set out once again, bow in hand and hope in your chest. Today feels different, or at least you try to convince yourself it does. You've decided to try the art of camouflage because at this point, it's become abundantly clear that the forest has been spotting you long before you ever spot your prey. You recall the village elder once smearing himself with mud and wrapping his body in sprigs of fern before heading into the trees. At the time, you thought he looked completely absurd, like a man who had lost a wrestling match with a compost pile. But now you're ready to embrace absurdity if it means finally sneaking up on something edible. So you begin to gather bits of bark, handfuls of damp moss, clusters of dry leaves, and even a few pine branches. You weave them carefully through the fabric of your tattered cloak, tucking the edges into your belt and under your hood. By the end, you resemble something between a shrub and a very nervous hedge. You glance at your reflection in a puddle and almost laugh. A walking salad, drenched in dew and optimism. But still, this is strategy. Camouflage, the great equalizer. You're no faster than the deer, no stronger than the boar, but maybe, just maybe, you can be sneakier. Moving through the forest now becomes a careful ballet. Each step is calculated, slow, measured. You crouch behind trees, hold your breath at every gust of wind, and wince every time a twig betrays you with a crisp snap underfoot. The leaves rustle like gossip around you, alerting the woods of your presence with every clumsy movement. Still you persist. You spot movement ahead. A flash of tan, maybe a deer? You freeze, heart racing, limbs aching from holding position. For a few glorious moments, you believe the camouflage is working. The creature hasn't bolted. But then a bird calls loudly overhead. The deer flinches, and in a blink, it's gone, vanishing into the brush like a ghost with hooves. You sigh. Another miss. Another failed sneak. You shift to a new position, brushing pine needles from your sleeve. A squirrel chatters above, scolding you for disturbing the peace. You shoot at a glare. Even the squirrels are judging you now. The thing about camouflage, you're starting to realize, is that it doesn't compensate for poor timing or noisy boots. Still, there's something oddly comforting about trying. About becoming part of the forest in a more literal way. You recall hearing that some medieval hunters would darken their skin with mud or soot to reduce the shine of their face, especially under moonlight. A primitive form of face paint. It wasn't just for vanity, though you admit a little natural eyeliner might be a look. It was about blending in, vanishing into the wilderness. Sometimes they'd even rub crushed herbs on their clothes to mask human scent. Sage, mint, or rosemary, not just for roast chicken, apparently. Historians still argue whether this type of camouflage was truly practical, or if it was more ritualistic, a way to spiritually become one with the forest, to align hunter and land in some quiet pact. Either way, it's a tradition that speaks to the same desire you now feel, to stop standing out and instead to dissolve into the world around you. You pause beneath a tree, letting your weight sink slowly to the ground. A shaft of sunlight breaks through the canopy, painting golden lines across your mossy sleeves. You rest your hand on the earth, feeling its cool firmness, the faint vibration of life moving just below the surface. Nearby, a group of squirrels dart through the branches, chattering and leaping with ease. Their movements are confident, acrobatic, and effortless. You watch them with something between awe and envy. They belong here. No mud paint or leaf suits required. A gust of wind stirs the trees, carrying the earthy scent of moss, old bark, and distant rain. You close your eyes for a moment and just breathe, letting the rhythm of the woods wash over you. Even without success, you feel oddly content. The forest isn't just a place you move through anymore. It's starting to feel like a place you're part of, even if it still thinks you're an intruder. Eventually, you rise, stretching your cramped knees and brushing leaves from your tunic. The sun is dipping now, its warm light beginning to fade into twilight gold. You make your way slowly back to camp, your cloak rustling with every step like a deciduous drumline. Back at camp, you shed your leafy disguise. It peels off in clumps, like the world's most inconvenient peel-off mask. Bits of moss cling to your arms, twigs fall from your hair. You're exhausted, your muscles sore, and your dinner non-existent, but you feel strangely proud. You sit by the fire, scratching a few notes into the dirt with a stick. Less salad, more shadow. A new motto. Maybe tomorrow you'll skip the bracken accessories and work on moving more quietly instead. As the fire crackles and the stars blink into view, you pull your blanket tight around you. Despite the day's shortcomings, your mind is calm. The forest seems to hum softly around you, its usual indifference mellowing into something that feels almost affectionate. You think again about the dance between hunter and hunted, the unspoken choreography that governs every step, every breath. And how maybe, just maybe, the first step isn't about stalking or shooting. Maybe it's just about learning how to disappear. You smile, eyes heavy, as the fire's glow fades into darkness. The wind shifts gently through the trees, like a lullaby in another language. And you let it carry you to sleep. The forest is alive with morning chatter, bird calls, rustling leaves, and the soft crunch of your boots on fallen twigs. Today, you decide to dive into medieval food preservation, a topic that feels a bit safer than aiming arrows but no less crucial to your survival. You've had more misses than hits lately, and your belly grumbles as if it too is judging your hunting record. Still, even if you did land something today, it wouldn't be enough to simply roast it on a spit and call it dinner. No, real survival, especially in a medieval forest, means thinking ahead. You need to stretch your luck. Make every small success count. You remember your mother's stories about how hunters would not only catch game but also preserve it for the long winters ahead. She used to say that a clever hunter filled his belly once and his larder thrice. Fresh meat was a luxury. Most meals came from what could be stored, rationed, and occasionally gnawed on when everything else had run out. The techniques sound simple on the surface: smoking, salting, drying, but once you try them yourself, you realize it's more art than science. Too much salt and the meat turns into a leathery brick. Not enough, and your hard-earned rabbit might surprise you in 3 days with a scent best left undescribed. You walk over to your neighbor's small forest lean-to, Hilda, an older woman who's forgotten more about meat preservation than you'll probably ever learn. She's hunched near a flat board, layering salt over strips of venison with the kind of focus usually reserved for sacred rituals. She pauses only once to glance at you and say, "It's not about the salt. It's about the timing. Leave it too long and it dries to dust. Not long enough, and the worms throw a feast." You nod sagely, like you understood every word, then quietly jot mental notes between sips of weak herbal tea. The smell is strong, earthy, briny, and a bit sharp, but oddly comforting, like a promise that tomorrow won't be an empty-belly day. It smells like hope, if hope had a slightly gamey undertone. You decide to try smoking a rabbit you managed to trap yesterday. A small one, hardly worth the effort, but every bite matters. You gut it carefully, scrape away the bits you know attract rot, and then string it up over smoldering alderwood embers. The smoke curls slowly around the carcass, like a ghostly shawl, seeping into every pore of the meat. You sit nearby, watching the process, nudging the fire every so often like a parent watching a restless toddler. Smoke is both a preservative and a predator. It can save the meat or destroy it, depending on how well you mind its temper. Medieval hunters often had to balance the immediacy of catching food with the patience of preservation, a challenge you sympathize with deeply. You're not just fighting hunger now, you're outwitting the future. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had access to salt in sufficient quantities for widespread preservation, or if many relied more on sun-drying or fermenting. In coastal villages, salt was abundant, sometimes traded like gold. Inland, it was precious, sometimes worth more than the animal it preserved. Some foraged herbs and tree bark with antimicrobial properties, stuffing meat into tight clay jars or burying it underground. Others relied on fire and prayer in equal measure. You remember hearing about hunters who buried their meat in snowbanks during winter, only to return to half-frozen feasts or, worse, nothing but a pile of scattered bones thanks to a hungry fox with a keen nose. You stir the fire and glance at your rabbit, now turning a rich brown. You wonder if it's working, if this ancient, smoky dance will pay off, or if, come next week, you'll be clutching your stomach and cursing your optimism. There's irony in this moment. You're sitting here preserving meat like a seasoned woodsman, despite having barely anything to preserve. It feels like laying bricks before you have a house, or writing letters with no one to send them to. And yet, it brings comfort. It gives the illusion of control, of preparedness in a world where arrows miss and weather turns cruel overnight. The forest is calm around you, as if approving of your efforts. A light breeze filters through the trees, carrying away some of the smoke and your lingering self-doubt. You sip more tea, made from wild mint and pine needles. It's bitter but warm, a quiet little ritual that makes you feel human, more than just a bumbling figure stumbling through the underbrush. Despite your recent streak of misses, you feel connected to a long chain of hunters who faced the same frustrations and hopes. They too squatted beside a fire, hoping the meat cured before the mold set in. They too cursed bad weather, dull knives, and the raccoon that stole half their rations while they slept. Your rabbit is nearly done, at least as done as it'll get in this humble setup. You wrap it in a linen cloth, pack it away, and let yourself breathe. One small win today. One more reason to keep trying tomorrow. At night, wrapped in your moss blanket, the smoky scent lingers on your clothes, in your hair, in the very air of your little camp. It's a smell that tells you you're doing something right, that you're learning, adapting, surviving in small, quiet ways. You listen to the nighttime forest, its rustles, distant owl calls, the occasional snap of a twig, and smile into the dark. You may not be a successful hunter yet, but you're becoming a resourceful one. And sometimes, that's the better kind. You drift off to the forest's night symphony, comforted by the thought of preserved meat waiting for lean days, and by the stubborn hope that tomorrow, your aim might just find its mark. The dawn is cool and crisp, dew still clinging to the grass as you rise from your damp blanket and stretch out limbs stiff from another restless night. Your stomach reminds you, once again, that you're not particularly good at this whole hunting thing. So today, You decide to focus on understanding something that's haunted your every step through these woods. Medieval forest laws, the strange and often maddening rules that governed where you could hunt, what you could take, and how badly things might go if you slipped up. You remember the village elder's voice, half whisper, half warning, reminding you of the so-called forest justice that lords loved to dole out. It wasn't justice in the sense of fairness, more like a chessboard of invisible boundaries and unwinnable wagers. The best forests, the ones teeming with deer, boar, and the occasional disgruntled-looking pheasant, were usually royal or noble property. You could walk through them, maybe, but hunt? That was as illegal as stealing a goose from the manor kitchen. You step cautiously over a rotted log, boots squelching in the soft earth. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls lazily, indifferent to your presence. You can't help but imagine what it was like to live so close to abundance and yet be denied it. It's not just hunger. It's the knowledge that the stag you see slipping through the underbrush belongs, by law, to someone who's probably still asleep in a feather-stuffed bed. You remember learning that even the forest itself was weaponized. Boundary lines weren't always marked in obvious ways, sometimes just a stretch of oddly pruned trees, or a ditch too regular to be natural. But the Lord's men knew. Oh, they always knew. You hear tales in the village of foresters, sworn men with authority to arrest, fine, and in some cases, shoot first and ask questions never. They carried bows, wore badges, and wielded the full weight of the estate's power. You could be charged with trespass, even if you were just gathering firewood too close to the wrong hedgerow. And the rules, they got oddly specific. There was, for instance, the rule that you could catch small game like rabbits, squirrels, or birds, but anything larger? That was poaching. One deer, even if injured and stumbling into your garden, was considered property of the Lord. You imagine the sheer frustration, hungry, desperate, with a wild boar in view, and yet legally forced to look away. It must have made the forest feel less like a refuge and more like a locked pantry stocked with forbidden fruit. You run your fingers over the handle of your bow, its worn wood smooth from hours of use and, well, less actual success. Even if you did spot a deer and took the shot, what then? If caught, it wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. Punishments varied by region and lord, but they could include fines so large they'd ruin a family, confiscation of your tools, or worse, public humiliation. You pass a clearing and picture it. A poacher in the pillory, stocks clamping his wrists and neck, while children threw clumps of mud or overripe turnips at him. Some lords made an example of repeat offenders, forcing them to parade around in animal skins or sit tied to a post bearing a wooden rabbit sign that read, in shaky paint, "I stole from the forest." One tale even told of a man who was forced to carry the gutted deer he had poached, tied to his back for a full day under the summer sun. Whether that one was true or just village lore, you're not sure, but it lingers uncomfortably in your mind. Historians still argue whether these harsh laws were always enforced or simply meant to scare. Some records suggest that enforcement depended less on the offense and more on how badly the Lord's pantry was stocked that week. A few sympathetic reeves, those local officials who could make life miserable or merciful, might turn a blind eye if your family was known to be starving. Others? Not so much. Justice wasn't blind, it just squinted in favor of wealth. You pause at the edge of a ravine and spot something odd. A crooked wooden post, half swallowed by ivy, leaning at an angle. You brush aside the leaves to reveal an old, weather-worn carving, the faint symbol of a deer, followed by Latin letters you can't quite read. A forest marker. Invisible lines, visible only to those who knew what to look for. You back away instinctively. Even now, centuries later, that mark carries weight in your imagination. You wonder how many other hunters like you stood at this very edge, trying to decide if a rabbit across the line was worth the risk. Some probably crossed without a second thought. Others turned back, defeated not by tooth or claw, but by a few carved letters and the threat of shame. Back at your modest camp, you sit on a mossy log and chew absently on a bit of hard bread. The fire crackles. You can still feel the invisible tension of those forest boundaries, humming beneath your feet like a current. The laws may have changed, but the echoes remain. Control. Power. You think of the forest not just as wilderness but as a battleground of class and privilege, its beauty fenced off with rules written in someone else's hand. You lean back and watch a squirrel dart along a branch overhead. No one owns that squirrel. For now. As twilight begins to descend, the forest comes alive with rustling sounds and distant hoots. You sit quietly, feeling the weight of history pressing gently against your shoulders, not oppressive, but present, like the scent of smoke in old wood. You realize that sometimes the greatest obstacle in the hunt isn't the prey, it's the ancient, invisible rules that determine who gets to chase and who must simply watch. You lie down, pulling your blanket tight against the cool air, eyes scanning the shadowy treetops above. The boundaries still hum, even here, even now. And as sleep gently pulls you under, your final thought is simple. In a different world, in a freer forest, you might have made a pretty decent hunter. The soft dawn creeps through the trees, wrapping the forest in gentle light, casting long golden beams across the mossy ground. The morning mist lifts slowly, like a veil being pulled away from the eyes of the earth. It's quiet, but not silent. The kind of quiet that hums gently in the background, the rustle of branches above, the drip of dew, and somewhere nearby, the first tentative chirp of a bird testing the air. You sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes, your back stiff from nights spent on uneven ground, and yet, strangely, you feel lighter. This morning isn't like the others. It's the end of something. A long trail marked by muddy boots, empty traps, growling stomachs, and quiet thoughts. As you rise for the final time in this quiet journey, your thoughts settle not on today's hunt, but on everything this slow, stubborn forest has taught you. It's not just about the chase or the catch, not anymore. It's about the waiting, the listening. The way the forest doesn't bend to your will, no matter how clever your traps or how silent your footfalls. Nature has its own rhythm, and you, the perpetual outsider, have had no choice but to slow down and match its pace. You came here to hunt. You stayed because you missed. And in missing, you found something else. You remember the hours crouched behind tree trunks, barely breathing, heart thudding in your ears, only for the deer to veer off at the last second. You recall the way your stomach grumbled as your snares sat empty for days, and how a single squirrel sighting could feel like spotting a ghost. But you also remember the sound of wind weaving through the canopy, the way moonlight danced on the stream's surface, and the first time you correctly predicted a shift in the wind before it even touched your cheek. Those weren't failures. They were lessons. You learned to be still, to notice the ants marching in single file across a route, to hear the difference between a rabbit and a weasel scuttling through the brush. You became part of the landscape, not just a figure stalking through it. Missing game taught you humility, a kind of quiet acceptance that some days are meant for watching, not winning. That no matter how sharp your arrows or how many times you check your snares, the forest will not be rushed. It offers no apologies for your empty hands. Historians still debate the daily realities of medieval hunters, whether they lived on the knife's edge of starvation or enjoyed a life of practical freedom under the canopy. Some argue that hunters were just peasants with a little more autonomy. Others say they carried a sacred knowledge of the land, passed down through generations, quietly essential to village survival. Maybe both are true. Maybe neither. You don't need an answer, not today. What you do know is that even in the silence of failure, there was meaning. The ache in your feet, the sting of cold wind on your face, the growl in your belly, those were real. They shaped you. And slowly, so very slowly, you began to listen. Not just to the forest, but to yourself. You feel, strangely, a connection to those who came before. All the nameless hunters who once moved through these same woods, who missed, who cursed under their breath, who went home empty-handed and still rose the next morning. Maybe they also stared up at the sky and wondered if they were wasting their time. Maybe they too found peace in the rhythm of it all. As night falls on your final day, the forest holds its breath. The shadows stretch long and soft across the earth, and the fire crackles low beside you. You wrap yourself in your moss blanket one last time, grateful for its scratchy comfort and the faint scent of wood smoke that now clings to everything you own. The world outside fades into a quiet blur. The stars blink overhead like ancient eyes, watching your stillness with indifferent patience. You breathe deeply, the cool air filling your lungs, and let the lessons of the hunt settle into your bones. You didn't bring home game, but you brought home something harder to catch: stillness, perspective. You hunted and missed again, and in doing so, you became someone else entirely. The missed catches become stories. You'll tell them with a wry grin about the squirrel that outsmarted your trap, the rabbit that stood 3 feet from you and somehow didn't care. And when you do, the failure will sound almost poetic. The quiet moments become memories. The sound of snow falling on your tent, the eerie silence after a storm, the soft sigh of an owl lifting into the sky. The forest, always patient, sings you a lullaby in crickets and rustling leaves, in the crackling of fading firewood, in the rhythmic whisper of your own breath slowing down. You drift off, not with regret, but with a quiet understanding. Sometimes the greatest victories don't look like trophies or full bellies. Sometimes they look like survival, or stillness, or simply staying one more night when you could have gone home. And in the very heart of that silence, wrapped in the arms of a forest that never gave you what you wanted but somehow gave you exactly what you needed, you finally rest.